Hello, I'm here with another word, and we're continuing with the journey of the Israelites, and we have now made it to I don't know how to say that, Deuteronomy, okay? And we are in chapter 2 of Deuteronomy. We are in chapter 2, that is what we're going to be referencing, and I'm still kind of processing this word, but I feel like it is important for me to share this, because I think sometimes we hear in the church, like, oh, when things are getting harder, you're closer to your breakthrough. Don't give up, keep going. When kind of things start to happen, as far as like opposition and attacks and things like that, it's like, don't give up. You're almost to your breakthrough. It's the enemy trying to make sure that you give up right before you get to your blessing. And while I agree with that, I think sometimes when you're going through it, it can be a little bit like challenging to really take in those words, right? And really appreciate what that means, right? Because, when we're really going through it, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, I think sometimes we just like, I don't know, need that support, and not to hear like, oh, you're almost there, keep on going. You know what I'm saying? Like, just need, someone to lean on, or, someone to help you, kind of get through that. And so I think sometimes when we hear this, it almost seems like empty words. I don't know if that makes sense. So I'm reading here, and I came across something that really puts that into perspective. So it doesn't feel so much as empty words, but a promise from God, right? Because sometimes we can be like, oh, where do you get that? Like, that sounds beautiful. Like, oh yeah, when it gets harder, that means that you're closer to your blessing, right? It sounds beautiful. It sounds like it makes sense. But again, is it biblically backed up? Because I think that when it's biblically backed up, we can hold on to the fact that that's God's promise. And if it's God's promise, then ain't nothing can change that. You know what I'm saying? So if God says, like, when it gets tougher, I'm almost to my breakthrough, then I know that that is going to be the case, because God is not man to change his mind, or to lie, right? So I hope that knowing that this is actually biblical and where to find it encourages you when you're having those hard times, and says, no, you know what? God said this, right? That, once I'm almost to my promised land or to my blessing, there's going to be opposition, and that's just part of it. But he also promises to see me through those things, right? So, I don't know. So again, I am in chapter 2 in Deuteronomy, and this is Moses is like recapping everything, the whole journey of the Israelites. And so, he's breaking down how there were certain regions where God specifically told them they could not step foot in, they could not fight these people, because this was land that was given to them as a promise. So there was, a certain region where it was the descendants of, I'm going to mispronounce this, but Esau, Jacob's brother, so they couldn't touch that land because that was a possession of them that God had promised them. And then there was another region where he says they could not enter that, and they were not to fight them, because that region belonged to the descendants of Lot, and God had given them this land. And so then it goes on to say how God had said, like, just like I removed or displaced the people that was there before to give it to the descendants of Lot and the descendants of Esau, however you say his name, I'm gonna, give you the land that's yours. And so it says that, right? So it goes, don't fight these people, don't even go into their land, be peaceful with them, buy food from them, things like that, but do not fight them for the land. So then it goes down to say for king, this is starting in chapter 2, verse 26 and on, and I don't know how to say this king's name. So then it goes on to say that Moses had asked this king to also be allowed to pass through. But because God had already told them that, in verse 25 it says, this day I will begin to put the dread and fear of you upon the nations under the whole heavens, who shall hear the report of you and shall tremble and be in anguish because of you. So because of this, the king did not want them to go through their land. So then so he was like, no, you cannot come through here, like, figure it out. So then in verse 30, it says that, but this king of Heshbon would not let us pass through, for the Lord your God hardened his spirit and made his heart obstinate, I can't say that he might deliver him into your hands as it is this day. And the Lord said to me, see, I have begun to give Son, I don't know how to say that, and his land over to you. Begin to possess it, that you may inherit this land. So thus far, right, they've encountered these other regions, these other people, where they were told by God to not start anything because he would not give them over to them, right? And they were able to pass through, and everything was fine. They continued the journey on, right? But then they hit this region where they have to go through, right, on their way to the promised land, but the king says no, right? So what does this tell us? Again, they're on their way to the promised land. So this tells us that they begin to get opposition. They're beginning to get opposition to where they need to go. But God tells them that he will give them onto their hands, right? And then verse 36, it says, as far as Gideon, there was not one city too strong for us. The Lord our God delivered all to us. So what does this mean, right? This means that they had to have opposition right before getting to the promised land, and even in the promised land. And if you remember, further on, it said that once they were in the promised land, that God had said, okay, after they defeated everyone, that God told them, okay, now I will give you years of rest. So again, before they were able to even take possession of the promised land and fully enjoy the benefits of the promised land, they encountered opposition, they encountered attacks, they encountered battles, they encountered all that. So to me, right, this is a reminder to me that right before I get to my promised land and I'm able to enjoy the benefits and I'm able to receive rest from the Lord, there's going to be great opposition, there's going to be great attacks, there's going to be great battles. But what God promises is during those moments of right before you get it, right, He has assured you that no matter what it looks like, that battle is won, because God is a God who keeps His promises. So if He promised that He's going to give you this, right, or whatever the promised land is in your situation, right, if He promised you, it does not matter what it looks like. It doesn't matter how many attacks we get or how many battles come before that, because God has promised to not only fight those battles and give those things, into our hands, but also that promised land will be ours, that we will take possession of that. So we have to just be encouraged by that. As much as it's exhausting and overwhelming sometimes spiritually, we have to go back to His word and remember that if this is causing us this much opposition, it means that we are around the corner from the promised land, and we just got to keep going. But not only that God is with us, and God is winning these battles for us, and God will deliver us. So I hope this is an encouragement. We have to hold on to God's promises, and we have to remember that God does not change what He says, that He does not lie, because He's not a son of man to do so, right? So I may not be able to hold on to people's words, but I can hold on to God's promise and God's words.